You ever see these maquettes from Pixar or Disney? Oh my god, look at this one. Look at this one. I remember seeing these as a kid on some Disney documentary. I really want one. But when I looked it up on eBay, yeah. So I guess I'll make my own. Now deciding which character to start with was pretty easy actually, because when I looked up Disney/Pixar maquettes on Google, the first ones I saw were of Mr. Incredible or Bob Parr from The Incredibles, and the references that I found on Google are really good. There's a good turnaround one, and even though I wanted to start with a two-dimensional character, I thought I'd help myself out with this first one and choose something that was already made three-dimensional. There are also endless reference photos of Bob Parr online, very easy to find, and not AI slop references from Pinterest, because what the hell is happening on Pinterest? Luckily, we kind of still have Google Images, even though AI is taking over that too. But finding references of Mr. Incredible is very easy. So that's who I started with. Alright, you know the drill, starting on paper. And if you're a somewhat beginner like me, I recommend doing a lot of planning beforehand to prep your mind. If you've seen my videos, you'll see that I always start on paper first, and I do draw out what I'm going to sculpt. In theory, this is kind of unnecessary because you could probably just print out a reference in the scale that you'd like your sculpture and work from there, but drawing it helps solidify a lot of things in my mind, including the line of action so that the gesture of my sculpture isn't so stiff. It also helps me solidify the hip and shoulder direction when I start to sculpt it, where the pinch should be, where the stretch should be. And you obviously don't need to draw this well, because what the hell is that? Bob Parr if he got hit with an anvil. But really, this is just to lock in ideas in my head, especially of the side and the back view. Doing these helped me figure out the spine and the natural S-curve that the spine builds, so that that's what the forms will kind of follow when I start to sculpt. Something else that I've been doing that helps me visualize these shapes in a three-dimensional space is drawing a wire frame or a mesh net, if that's how you want to think of it, over the reference, like this, so I can understand even the smallest plane changes on the form. I recommend planning your armature at this point as well. This is what I overlooked and was the mistake that I made. I didn't take my time on it, and I made my armature too short. So I didn't have wire sticking out of his feet so that I could plant him into the wood. So later I had to figure out a solution, which you'll see. So here I built his armature. I used foil in his torso and just used armature wire following his legs up across his chest and back down. I also used milliput, a 2-part epoxy sort of putty in the middle as his hips. For this I'm using polymer clay, and I'm starting by laying down the clay. In roughly the shape of Bob's torso, I made a triangular cone shape for his head for now, and I'm blocking in the larger pieces or larger parts, like his belly, shoulders, and chest. I'm turning it around to see if I'm capturing the S-curve of his spine. Every time I'm looking back, comparing it to my drawing, comparing it to the reference, trying to make sure the gesture is staying and nothing's stiffening too much. And here, when I'm laying down the clay, I'm focusing on getting the large forms, but also the correct volume all around. His legs here are just cylinders, and I'm laying those down. I did use armature wire that was a bit too thick, and because of this I wasn't able to get his ankles as thin as they actually are. So think about that when you're planning out your armature. I'm looking back and forth to see if I were to draw a wire cage around my sculpture, if it's looking similar to what my reference is looking like. At this point, his chest was not giving the wraparound that it needed, so I added more volume to it. I'm starting to block in parts of his face now. And his face was super hard. I thought it was the hardest part until I got to the arms and hands, but at this point it was still a challenge. I'm focusing on getting a good gesture for his face. A lot of things have a gesture, not just the whole body. His face is looking toward the left, so it's making a C curve. Kind of. Blocking in his brow bone. This is what I have so far with all the forms blocked in. You don't have to smooth it out the way I did. You can keep it kind of messy and then refine later. That's probably better. I'm adding in pieces for his cheekbones, and I'm trying to get the features on his face. Something I'll focus on next time is not being afraid to lay down clay. I wasn't adding enough, so it wasn't giving me the shape or the volume that matched the reference, and I had to go back and fix it later. For his eyes, I went in with the needle tool and carved them out that way. And kind of just pushed the clay around until I got his eye shape. I used the same technique with his mouth. And this is what I got so far after a while of working on it. It's looking a little uncanny at this point, and here I stop for a brief intermission. So I'm pretty happy with the side profile. When you turn so far, shapes are a little off. Here's the part that's driving me crazy. See how his face is concaved in? There's no volume there. It almost looks like his face got punched in. I lost a lot of clay there, so I have to go back and do that part. Alright, now time to focus on his backside. We're gonna give him a cute little BBL. It probably would also be helpful to look at real photos for anatomy, because sometimes references don't really give you a clear look at what it might look like underneath all the skin, if that makes sense. Okay, next day, this is what I got. And the solution I had for the armature is taking armature wire and kind of stabbing him in the back with it. So I made a hole in his back and I kind of propped him up that way. My metal tools finally came in the mail, and it turns out I was correct from my last video. These are the tools I was missing. The silicone sometimes is not strong enough to withstand the kind of sculpting I want to do. These are probably going to be the best tools you'll use for sculpting with polymer clay and oil-based clay. Comparing him to the reference, and I'm noticing that his jaw isn't quite right. So I'm going back and fixing it and adding more so it matches his overall form. And this is what I settled with. Not perfect, but I think a little bit more likeness to Bob Parr. And the dreaded part that I was procrastinating this whole time, the arms. And they were, probably the most difficult part. Drove me crazy. I took it step by step. Another reason I chose Mr. Incredible was because he had very defined arms and it looked easier to do. I was wrong. There's a lot of muscular structure that I probably should have opened up past notebooks on to help me figure out the muscles underneath. So it probably isn't anatomically correct. So what I focused on was matching the volumes from the reference and making sure that the muscles look like they're going in the direction that they're supposed to, keeping the flow of the arm. My reference was my best friend at this point. I looked at it constantly, and it's what I used as an anchor for all the muscle groups. I just took it step by step. From the shoulder cap to the bicep, the tricep, the forearm, and no one tells you about the elbow. That was something I learned that I had to add because there was just a gap in the back. It really is just a pad of clay. You can kind of see it a little bit more here. And I'm using this metal tool to smooth everything, but making sure it's going in the direction that it's going in the reference photo. And the muscles are flowing where they need to flow. Honestly, just lay the clay down. Don't be afraid. I think that's what held me back. Had I just laid the clay down, I would have just fixed it. Don't be afraid to mess up. Luckily, this clay doesn't dry until you bake it, so there's a lot of time to fix it. And if it turns out bad, just work on it on the next one. And the hands, oh my god, thank god he was wearing gloves because I did not want to spend too much time on this. At this point, I wanted to just finish this thing, so the hands are probably the weakest element of the whole sculpture. I don't think they turned out too bad. If you get the overall form, no one will even notice. Don't worry, I will practice hands, I promise. I just used a silicone tool to indent the eye logo for the Incredibles. Woohoo! Last step, using Turpenoid. Turpenoid is a turpentine substitute that's odorless. It just melts the top layer of your clay and smooths everything out, so you can really fix a lot of imperfections here. Be careful though, it's really strong. Don't use too much. There were some parts where I did use too much, and it really wiped away a lot of detail. So keep that in mind. You'll be brushing away a lot if you're not careful. And he's ready to bake. Zhuzhing a little bit though. And here's where it all went wrong. He fell in the oven. He had some scratches in places, but I just went back and filled in those spots as best as I could. It's not perfect. It didn't look as good as when I first sculpted it, but no worries. There'll be more sculptures. I'll learn. But since he wasn't on the base anymore, I just ripped his feet off. I left the hole in his back, and then I put him in a coffin of brown rice and I baked him that way. And this is the finished sculpt. I'm very happy with it. As always, thank you so much for watching. I reached 500 subscribers and it is the best feeling in the world. And I want to thank each and every one of you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.